Hey guys, welcome back to Cisco Nate. It's been a very long time since I've made a new video, and I'm finally kind of sinking my teeth back into making holistic, good content for you guys. So today's video is going to be about the FMC API interface. And you tend to have kind of two domains of knowledge that kind of meet in the middle to make these types of things fully functional. So you've got people who know and understand firewalls and or firepower, but they may or may not have software development expertise. And then you've got the software developers who may or may not have firewall expertise. And you kind of need to bridge this gap between the two so that you can become a fully functional engineer. This video is intended to bridge that gap so that wherever you start, you will end up in the middle with a skill set to fully realize and use the FMC API. So I'm going to jump back into my desktop here. You guys should see the desktop now, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay out the structure of our video. So I'm going to take a look at the FMC API Explorer and teach you guys intuitively how to kind of navigate it, why it is structured the way it is, and how to develop your intent and your programmatics so that you can use this API. And once we get through that, we're going to go through kind of how you iteratively go and pull out specific information that you will then need to supply back to use the API. And we're going to go through using Python and some sort of Python dev environment to then develop a fully functional API call in an unsecure manner, and then flip it to secure using certificate verification. So that's it. That's our intent throughout this video. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my desktop here. I'm VPN'd into my lab right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just start from the beginning. So we're going to open our Internet Explorer. We're going to go ahead and navigate to our FMC. And every FMC that Cisco releases has this API Explorer built in. So if you just navigate to your normal URL or IP address and append API Explorer, you will then be able to log in and view the API Explorer. Let me get the right username and password here. Okay, so this is what the API Explorer looks like, and it's built kind of in a framework that I don't necessarily agree with. Everything you want is here. They put it alphabetically, but that kind of, it's up to a little bit of interpretation. If you're familiar with FMC, it has what's called domains. And domains are the way you kind of segregate, think managed service provider, roles and responsibilities, or different customers who are going to individually manage their firewalls. If you have multiple people and multiple domains in this firewall, that becomes very important. And it is a sticking point for using the API, as to use the API, you must supply a domain UUID when you're making the call. Well, so how do you figure out what the domains are? That's going to be part of our walkthrough here today. But at the surface, if you look through this API, it has examples of all of the different APIs and the different types of calls and the API endpoints. And you'll notice here that it gives me a URL, API FMC config v1 domain UUID. So notice the curly brackets. This implicates that you must supply that UUID in this call, in this format, so that you can make this call. So at this point in time, I do not, as an engineer or software developer, have enough information to use this API because I do not have this domain UUID. So where do you get that? Well, it's somewhere down here in system information or system config, where you do a fetch to query for the domain. And when you do that, we're going to go ahead and click try it. And when you click try it out, it then gives you a prompt and says, well, fill in all the information you get. So I'm going to say expanded is true. And this will give me a list of all of the objects with their attributes, which means if there's more than one domain, I'll get all that info back. Now, this is the way you use the API Explorer, and you kind of have to piecemeal stuff together. So I'm going to go ahead and pull a notepad out, and then I'm going to execute this. And you notice it fetched all of my domains. And in this case, there is one global domain. So just for my edification and ease of use, I'm going to go grab this. I'm going to go throw it into a notepad to keep track of my domain. And now I have this domain UUID. So now if I wanted to start getting a little more creative, I've got the bare minimum I need to supply to start getting information about the server. There's also some of these other ones like server version. If I hit try it out and then execute, now it just tells me, hey, you're running 7.7.10.1, build 6, FMC for VMware. A lot of good info you can get from the API, but this version probably is not something you would normally be using. What you would normally probably be looking at as well, hey, give me what devices I have, what firewalls I have, and all of that type of information. So I'm going to come back up here and let's do a few things. No, I don't want to do deployment. Yeah, let's do this. So I'm going to go ahead and use this API here. So I'm going to expand this out. Remember that domain UUID I had? Whoa, what is going on? That domain UUID I had here. I need to fetch that, grab that. Now it's already populated it here, which is nice. It never used to always do that, and it will not do that if you have multiple domains. I am running a single domain, so it's automatically populating that here, which makes this easier. But just understand that if you have multiple domains, you will have to do this yourself. I'm gonna hit try it out. I'm gonna hit execute. And here's the type of information it gives me. It says, hey, this FMC is managing a 3105 and a 3105. That's good info. And then it gives me the information about those chassis themselves. Again, more information that I may need to separately grab and use later. Okay, so this is generally how the API Explorer works. That's great, but what were we talking about before? I said I'd show you where the API Explorer is, how to look through the API Explorer and iterate through it, and why you need to iterate through it. Because if you think programmatically, a computer, a script, does not understand that there may or may not be multiple domains. So you have to fetch that domain ID first, and then you take that domain ID and supply it for each of the subqueries for information about devices in that domain or policies in that domain, things like that. One other thing we glossed over, because when you're using the API Explorer, is authentication and authorization. Now, the API, when you're using the real API, you have to authenticate, provide a username and password. Once you do that, it provides you a token. A token is a random string that is then valid to authenticate you again subsequently for a set amount of time before it will then expire. This just simplifies the authentication process and makes it so you don't have to keep supplying username and password, potentially plain text if you're using HTTP versus HTTPS. So we're going to go through all of that a little bit later, but that's the kind of programmatics and approach that you want to take when you're looking at the API Explorer. So we're going to go ahead and look at turning this into real code. The first thing you need to do is use some sort of software development or programming language. Now, I personally use Python, and that's what I'm going to be showing you here. And I'm going to be doing multiple things. So I think it would be first good to talk about your approaches to kind of feeling out the API. I showed you the API Explorer. Something else that is also nice is Postman. Now, Postman kind of simplifies the process of feeling out or exploring APIs. It does not do everything for you. You cannot take Postman and have it become a script that fetches information, reaches out to another server, does anything with it. It is simply an API Explorer. So it takes care of some of the legwork. Like they already have methods for fetching tokens and pulling that information in. You still have to supply the URL for the endpoint. If you look here, okay, so it looks like they removed the auth token method from the API Explorer, which is not helpful for you guys. I don't know why they would have done that. But regardless, it is required so that you can fetch and use the rest of the API. So the API Explorer is now functional for exploring the API, but not functional for figuring out how to use it. Okay, so we're going to come back here to Postman. there is this API endpoint, which is missing. Notice this octet here, or this part of the URL, FMC platform v1. Everything after v1 matches the API subcategory. So if you're looking at analysis, for example, you've got down here analysis. Under audit, you've got audit. Under backup, you've got backup. So in this case, you're looking to auth and generate a token. And this token is then what you supply in the header of your HTTP requests. So if I hit send, it's going to, in Postman, take care of all the busy work that you would normally have to script. Go log in with the username and password that I supplied. You notice I have basic auth here and a username and a password. And then it's going to return the data from my call. And it's going to show me here all of the information that I need. So if you notice there's an access token here. That's what I need to supply on subsequent API calls. And then it also has some useful information like domain ID and stuff like that. So I know the global domain ID is this directly from my auth token. That's super useful for making this quick to then iteratively turn around and say, okay, within that global domain, I now want to look at policies or create a host, things like that. So that is how Postman works. Now, it's really useful, as I said, and there's plenty of libraries that provide these kind of key components, but you can't do anything with it once you've looked at it in Postman. So Postman will keep track of these headers, and if I had other stuff in here, I could then say, okay, now take this key, this access token that I got, and this UID, and go fetch objects. But again, that's not really useful for getting a practical implementation for you guys. So now I'm going to close out of Postman, and I'm going to move on to using Python. Now, my Python IDE development environment that I prefer to use is pycharm. That is in no way the type of IDE you must use. You can preferentially just go to, what is it, python.org and download the latest version of Python. The difference being that when you just get straight Python and you install it on your box, that's great, but you don't have a good way to visualize what you're typing and whether you're calling the proper libraries and validating the input or what you're typing in there. That's what an IDE does. You can get away with just installing Python and then writing a script manually yourself. But when you use an IDE, it's helpful because it color codes things. It tells you you're importing all the libraries you need. Or, hey, you're importing a library that you're not using. That's why it's gray here without the hash in front of it, saying, hey, you're importing this, but you're not using it. Just wanted to let you know. I'm going to provide you guys with this script here in my video so that you can take this as a starting point for using and developing your own API. And this example that I've put together here takes Python, uses a bunch of libraries to read JSON data, to read CSV files, which is my Excel, comma, delimited format. And I've set up what's called a bulk host import spreadsheet here. And this is something that a lot of people commonly will likely do first time around. So I thought it was a good example of what to do here. So I've got a list here with 4 columns. Why 4? Well, because if I go look at my API Explorer and I'm looking at importing objects, let's see if there is an objects. Okay, here's my objects. And then if I'm looking at creating a host object, let's scroll down and see if there's an objects hosts. Keep going, keep going. There we go, objects host. So I can get a list of hosts or I can create hosts in a programmatic way. And if I look at this API, it has the option of doing a bulk import, which means importing more than one. So I would switch this to true. Now, what is that really doing on the back end? If you come down here, it tells you that I'm going to be creating and ingesting something that looks like this. Notice it has name, type, value, and description. These are the required fields for importing into an object into the FMC API. So I'm going to come down here, validate that I've got those 4 fields that are required, which I do, I've populated it with valid non-duplicative data. None of these overlap or duplicate each other. That's great. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Then I'm going to come back to my Python script. And essentially what I do is I import requests. That is a library in Python that allows you to interact with HTTP and HTTPS APIs or services. So in this case, I'm defining a bunch of variables up front just so I can simply refer to them later. Things like the IP address of my FMC, the location of that comma delimited CSV file I had created, the username I'm going to use, the password I'm going to use. Now, how did I know I'm going to use this username and password? It's because in my FMC, we can get out of the Explorer now, I need to create a username and password for this user that I'm going to be accessing the API with. So if you come to your FMC and you're prepping to do an API user and use the API, then you want to create a user in here. In this case, I created one called FMC API. I made it admin and it's a local user. I did this just so I wouldn't have any problems with permissions. Now, do you want to do this in production? Probably not. You want to scope your API user permissions to exactly what it needs to do. I wrote a script that reads in the CSV, and you notice there's a lot of other data here that I've left commented out, and this was for doing bulk imports of networks or network ranges, IP ranges. I left this here as a skeleton so that you guys will have enough to open and ingest a CSV. In this case, I'm only ingesting hosts, and that's all that I have in the file, but I left some example code in here commented out that helps you do other stuff. Then I'm going to take my hosts and dump them as a JSON object, i.e. save it as a JSON object in the hosts variable. Hosts equals json.dumps object host, which is what I read in from the CSV file. And then I set up my requests HTTP, HTTPS authentication call. Now, a lot of this may be over top of your head for right now, but simply put, this is the requests library in Python. I'm defining the requests variable, making it none. I'm setting the headers to JSON, which is exactly what you need based on the API Explorer we were looking at before. I'm setting the path, the URL path that I'm going to be accessing, my initial access, to generate a token. And then I'm creating my authentication URL, which is a combination of the base address of the server and then this path for what I want to use. Now I've supplied two ways in here of authenticating. One is just simple HTTP authentication. And Python will yell at you if you do this. It'll tell you, hey, you're not doing this very securely. So the only way to get it to work without actually throwing an error is for you to tell it to ignore these errors that are going to be thrown at you when this happens. And that's where this try disable warnings comes in. Okay, so everything is here for a reason. You can remove this, but you'll have trouble if you don't authenticate securely. Right below it, right here, is the securely authenticated call. And I'm going to walk through doing both of these. But I wanted to kind of walk through the structure first before we get to that. The rest of this is creating your headers that are necessary. And if you copy exactly what I have here, everything will work for you because this reaches in, pulls out a bunch of information through the API request, and then sets a domain UUID and pulls that back. So what you do is you make your call. When it makes the call, a bunch of information is returned to you. Remember the Postman call that we took a look at earlier? And I'll pull it up again just so you see. But right now I have nothing. These are what I am setting up, and this is exactly what's happening here in all of this setup. But when you actually execute this call and you hit send, it's going to get a bunch of information back with named headers. And you notice in Python, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, set my auth token to the auth headers, and I'm grabbing this header. If we take a look in the auth headers, that is this header right here. So here's my temporary authentication token, the token with which I can then make subsequent requests. I'm also, since I'm getting information back that includes domain UUIDs, I'm also saying, hey, I'm going to need that anyways later. So set the auth header domain UUID to this variable. So now I have the 2 bits of information I need, a token and domain UUID. And now I just make calls continuously with that information. I set the headers portion of my requests from now on to the auth token. And then I just start making calls to whatever API endpoints I want with whatever data I want. So in this case, I read in my CSV data from this file. I've got all of these columns here. One of the columns is type, and it delineates whether it's a host, a network, or a range. I say if host does not equal nothing, then call the API to import the hosts in bulk. That means instead of just one at a time, I'm saying take this entire JSON, which currently has 4 hosts, and send it over. And the API on the other side knows what to do with that as long as you send this option here, bulk equals true. So I make the call, I send the data, and then I return either successful or I return the error that I incur. So I'm going to come down here. Once you've taken this script as your Python script in your IDE or in your command line script, you type Python. My script is called main.py. Now in my IDE, I have what's called virtual environments. You can think of this as a way of kind of segregating your different versions of Python code. If you're familiar with programming, there's Python 2.8, there's Python 3, there's Python 3.6, 3.7, 3.8. Your computer needs to know which Python it's going to use. And in order to find Python, when you tell it run Python, it has one of those mapped in what's called path. Path is all of the directories it looks to find executables. So in this case, Python is on the path, but it's only one of them. It's 3.7 or 3.8 or 3.0. And there's no way for you to differentiate which one you want to call. And that's where virtual environments, VN, comes into play. It allows you to take your operating system and kind of segregate it, chunk it up and say, well, I'm using Python 3.7 for this and Python 3.8 for this. So you don't have to continually uninstall and install the version you want to execute your code with the version of Python you want. That's important because you have different functionalities based on which version of Python you're using. So in this case, I already have Python 3.8 set to run for this virtual environment. So just typing Python, it will find that. And then I have to tell it which script to execute, which is main.py. Now it's going to run through this script that I've created and put together, and it is hosted on Google Drive, linked at the bottom of this video for you. And it gave me a bunch of information back. That information is post successful. I just successfully did this for you. It tells me which API it called. And this is all because I am returning and printing the data. This is me with my script. This will not happen automatically for you. So if you use this script, it gives you some useful debug information. It will also tell you if it fails. And when it fails, it will tell you why it failed. It can be a myriad of things. You can't reach the server. Quite often you forget to VPN into your environment or something else. Or your URL has changed, or your IP has changed. Something has changed. You'll get that information here, and you'll have to understand how to troubleshoot that. Now in this case, it tells me it successfully imported all of this information. So let's take a look at my data. I had host API 5678. If I go to my FMC and I want to verify this, I can go to my objects, object management. I can now filter and type host, and look at that. Host 5, 6, 7, and 8 are in my FMC. Now, if I try to do this again, I will probably get an error because those objects already exist now. And look at that, error connection, error 400. Well, what does that mean? Google foo, my guys. Come here, you type HTTPS error 400. Bad request. Now, this is very generic, right? But as you get used to doing this stuff, you'll be able to quickly discern, why is it giving me bad request? Well, there's only a few reasons why it's a bad request. Bad request means I did successfully reach the server, but it is telling me there is something wrong. There's only a few reasons why this could be wrong. Either I hit the wrong API, supplied invalid formatted data, or the stuff is already there. It already exists. So in this case, this was a perfect example of why having this type of debugging print information when you are initially developing these scripts is good. So that's that. That is the initial unsecure authentication method. What if I wanted to do this securely? Let's comment out my unsecure call and uncomment my secure call. The only thing really different here is you see verify equals false versus verify string data path. What does that mean? Well, verify in request means verify the certificate of the server you're reaching out to. Okay, if I look at my server here, this is the exact certificate that the API will see. So there's a few things we can do. I can go look at the certificate for the web server, because that is what we're going to be looking at. And when you're doing a verify, it's looking to verify the root server and any intermediate servers up to that client or that server cert. Everything up to. Now in this case, I have a root certificate authority that directly generated the FMC certificate. So the only thing I need in my verification chain is that root certificate authority cert. So how do I get it? Well, if you're using Chrome, looking at its browser, here's our certificate chain. There's the root certificate authority server, cert. I can hit export. I can export that down to my downloads. Let's go take a look at the downloads. In order to use this cert, you need to verify that it is in base64 PEM format. Now, let's not get all munged up about extensions, right? .cert, .cer, .pem. What matters is it in PEM, base64 format? You know it is if you see this. You've got the bookend, begin and end certificate, and something that looks like this jumble of bits in the middle. This is PEM format. This is base64 format. Perfect. Now, I can choose to turn this and rename it as a PEM. So everybody knows, common nomenclature, that it is a PEM cert. So I can do that now. I want to make sure that I say all files so it doesn't just append. I want to take this and say .pem. Now notice there's another cert here, so it's going to get pissy. Blah, blah, blah. Do you want to replace it? Yeah, sure. Okay, I just took this cert. I renamed it. I dumped it there. Now I'm going to take this cert that I just created, and I'm going to put it in the directory that I'm going to verify or look for this certificate chain data in. Now in this case, I already have one here, but just for sake of this demonstration, I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to paste the new cert that I just created. I'm going to tell it, don't worry, I don't need to associate with file type. So I have my certificate here. What is this really doing now? It's stringifying, turning something into just a plain string. And that thing is data path. So let's go find data path. I see file path. I see pathlib. Ah, here's the uncommented stuff that I left in the script for you. Now what's important about this is the safest way to dynamically, from within your script, determine your local directory. And this is important because if you hard code paths, then when you move the script somewhere else, you run into lots of problems. This is unequivocally almost always the way you should define where am I? Where's my base directory? And then I tell it, here's the actual path to the certs that I want you to validate against. I take the base directory and append rootca.pem. Okay, so I've defined my data path. I've told it, hey, I want you to execute request and verify the certificate using this certificate chain, and everything else should just work, right? I'm generating the same exact authentication request, but now I'm verifying. So let's go see what happens. We're going to get an error, 400, because our data hasn't changed. So let's go fix that real quick first. I'm going to delete that. We're going to create 8 was our last one. Make this 9. Make this a 10. Go to change this to 3. change this to 3, change this to 9, change this to 10. So I now have a completely new data set in my CSV. I'm now using secure authentication call here, saying verify, and verify it based on this certificate chain. So that's good. Let's see, is there anything else I need to do? I'm going to make my call. It's going to reach out, pull a token. It's going to supply the domain UUID that it gets during the token fetch. And then it's going to make a post with my hosts, request.post, with my CSV data that it also reads in. And that should be it. All right, let's check and see if it works. Here's my last call. It says post successful. It shows that these new objects are now in there, and it did it while verifying the certificate. So let's go take a look. Let's refresh our objects. Let's filter again for hosts. There's 9, there's 10. Bam, it worked. That's great. Let's see what happens if we purposely break this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this certificate. I'm going to refresh my metadata to guarantee that I have unique or authentic, unique data. I'm going to do it a different way this time. I'm going to drag this down and use Excel's autocomplete. And then I'm just going to delete the 2 columns above it. I'm going to save this. So now I've got new data. That's not going to be the reason for an error. I've got a verified secured authentication request going up, but I'm missing my trust store, my certificate chain. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at this. Error generating auth token could not find a suitable TLS CA certificate bundle, invalid path. It's telling me, hey, you told me to look for rootca.pem, but it doesn't exist. This is perfect. This is exactly the type of troubleshooting and debugging output you want to see and the type of thought process you want to go through. All right, so, hey, I know it's missing. Let's go put it back. Let's keep iterating over this to see how it looks and what's happening. Okay, or not. Let's drag that over here. What is going on? There we go. Nope, I don't want to refactor. Copy. Paste. rootca.pem, great. Don't care about associating a file type. Cancel. There it is, it's back. Now let's rerun our script. Again, we already refreshed the data contents of the CSV. And boom, we've just added more stuff. So that's it, right? I just wanted to give you a good holistic overview on how to go through creating these scripts, how to explore the API, what kind of tools you might want to use to look at the API, and then functional scripting with a functional template for you, including a secure method so you don't get those errors. This is how you want to do it in production. You do want to do the verification, the secure verification. This is a simple way. It is not the official way. You should probably really be doing it, but it is a way that works. This is not truly good code hygiene. I'm not calling the function with main equals self or anything else, but it works. So that's it, guys. I'll catch you later. Have a good one.